Right, I'm now recording the class. So, as I was talking, Satan's third speech, he now issues a rallying cry to all concerned, all his rebel angels, that they should now rise up. And very importantly, this speech also talks about this binary between heaven and hell, which he tries to break, as it were. So, there is this binary that hell is a state of despair, that heaven is a state of hope, that hell is a state of darkness, heaven is a state of light. But Satan seems to try and cut across this boundary. So, uh, is this the region, this the soil, the clime, said the lost archangel, this the seat that we must change for heaven, this mournful gloom for that celestial light? Be it so, since he, who now is sovereign, can dispose and bid what shall be right. Farthest from him is best, whom reason hath equalled, forth hath made supreme above his equals. So, you know, even within Satan's speech, Milton seems to provide this idea that, God is the more rational, uh, reason hath equaled, force hath made supreme above his equals. But there's always this assertion of the selfhood, which will never yield to any kind of authority. So he's happy to, as it were, bid adieu to those happy fields. So when compared with this mournful zone of hell, farewell, happy fields, where joy forever dwells. Hail, horrors. So he's sort of accepting the horrors. Hail, infernal world, and thou profoundest hell, receive thy new possessor. So he's now accepting the state of hell, one who brings a mind not to be changed by time or by place of time. Therein lies, Satan's heroism, as it were, that he refuses to allow his mind to be swayed. Now, once again, you can see this as a kind of an evil fascination, or a fascination with evil and obsession with evil, or you can see this as a kind of heroism of never yielding to authority. So, mind not to be changed by place or time. The mind is its own place, a very famous line of Milton, Ete tu mathae rekho. The mind is its own place, and in itself can make a heaven of hell, a hell of heaven. So ultimately, then comes this question, which all of you have been trying to ask: what is evil and what is good? Is it something that is prescriptive, that is laid down, or is it something that is intensely personal? Now, this is a question which is very strange in a Christian epic, isn't it? That with such force, Satan can suggest that the concept of good and evil is relative, in the sense that, he's going to transform within his mind what is hell into what is heaven. No matter where, if I still be the same, and what I should be, all less than he whom thunder hath made greater. Now, again, you have to see that, this is one of those points in history where individualism, which is seen as the hallmark of our modern society, is still something which is, looked at with a degree of suspicion. So there is this, what Sidney suggested, the erected wit, given world order, against which Satan's monomaniac obsession with the self, as it were, Satan's great individualism, right, becomes a kind of uh, an anathema, as it were. Now, also important is this concept of pride. Now, Satan, as you can see, is marked by a sense of self-pride. Now, if you look at the Christian, worldview and the classical worldview, pride is something which is seen in the classical worldview as something which is an essential part of manhood, right? I say manhood because most epics were intensely male. Whereas pride in the Christian worldview is seen as something which is essentially a sin, right? So you surrender to God rather than wallow in your own pride. But in the classical, worldview, it is pride which is more important than anything else, even the state, right? So these are two different kinds of worldview that are coming through. Now, similarly, revenge in the classical worldview is something which is eminently acceptable. Revenge in the Christian worldview is God's prerogative, right? So, in that sense, here Milton is casting Satan as a kind of an epic classical hero as opposed to the Christian epic hero, right? So the point here is that not only different political positions come through, but also positions from different forms of the epic also are being placed side by side. এটা কিন্তু একটু মাথায় রেখো, because this is something which is more complex, right? That uh, you have to ask yourselves, is Satan heroic or is he villain? Now, at that point of time, seen from the classical point of view, Satan is heroic. So even if he's defeated in battle, he's not vanquished, right? He's not destroyed. He's picking himself up for the next battle, which is heroic in the classical sense of the term. But if you see this as a Christian battle between good and evil, then Satan is a villain with his pride, which is a cardinal sin, right? I hope you understand, these two different positions. So, can make a heaven of hell a hell of heaven. What matter where, if I still be the same, and what I should be, all but less than he whom thunder hath made greater. So Satan says, I am equal to him. He only has thunder. God has thunder, therefore he is greater. Here at least we shall be free. And this is a question that many of you were posing, and I was also raising this question about freedom, right? Freedom and tyranny. And therefore Milton seems to suggest that it is better to reign in hell, be free in hell, than be servile in heaven, right? So this question of freedom problematizes and puts this poem squarely within the political discourse of the contemporary era. The Almighty hath not built here for his envy, and will not drive us hence. Here we may reign secure, and in my choice to reign is worth ambition, though in hell. Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. It's another important line I would like you to mark. Now, the only point of debate here is Satan falling into the same trap of tyranny as he's accusing God? Because ultimately it's his reign, right? He's talking about being the king of hell. But wherefore, and this is what happened to Cromwell also, because, in that sense, Cromwell, who became the Lord Protector of England and was seen as a head of parliament, actually became a dictator in his own right. So, you see, we can look at these questions, through different kinds of prisms, right? So, but wherefore let we then, our faithful friends, the associates and co-partners of our loss, lie thus astonished on the obvious fool, and call them not to share with us their part in this unhappy mansion, or once more with rallied arms to try what may be yet regained in heaven, or what more lost in hell. So he's now turning to his compatriots, and Beelzebub is adding to this. So Satan spake, and him Beelzebub thus answered, leader of those armies bright, which but the omnipotence none could have foiled, if once they hear that voice, their liveliest pledge of hopes and fears and dangers heard so oft, in worst extremes and on the perilous age of battle, when it raged in all assaults, their surest signal, they will soon resume new courage and revive though they now lie groveling and prostrate on yon lake of fire. As we erewhile, astounded and amazed, no wonder fallen such a pernicious height. So, Beelzebub, what is he saying? He's saying, Satan, you go and address them. Your voice, which had stirred them in battle, right, which was the rallying cry for which they fought and they braved all dangers. You were the leader. So, you, if you sort of give your speech and address them, then they will arise from their stupor, just as we have arisen, because all of us have fallen from high. His scarce had ceased when the superior fiend was moving towards the shore, his ponderous shield, and once again you come across this epic simile, ponderous shield, Satan's shield. What is it compared with? Ethereal temper, massy, solid, weighty, large and round behind him cast, the broad circumference hung on his shoulders like the moon. Right, so the Satan's shield is compared with the hugeness of the moon. And then comes a very important twist, whose orb through optic glass the Tuscan artist views at evening from the top of Fiesole. Right, so this is the reference to Galileo, whom Milton had actually met in Tuscany in 1638. So remember, Paradise Lost is 1667. Milton is referring to his visit to Galileo in 1638, right? So Galileo at this point of time was imprisoned and he was looking through his telescope at the moon. And the moon was shining bright in his telescope, whose orb through optic glass the Tuscan artist views at evening from the top of Fiesole or in Valdarno to describe new lands on the moon, rivers in a spotty globe. So the question is, why does Milton invoke Galileo? Is Milton trying to make an equation between Satan and Galileo? Because Galileo too was a rebel who went against the church and who defied their learnings to try and create a new paradigm of astronomy, as it were. So, does Milton compare the rebellion of Satan with the rebelliousness of Galileo? It's an interesting question. And then comes his spear, Satan's spear. So you have these epic metaphors, epic similes, with which, Milton is gradually invoking this figure of Satan with a certain degree of legitimacy and a certain degree of great rebellious quality. So his spear, Satan's spear, to equal which the tallest pine hewn on Norwegian hills, to be in the mast of some great admirals, were but a wand. You see, in those days, the tallest trees were the Norwegian pines. And in shipbuilding yards, the Norwegian pines from Norway, that is, the pines which you find in Norway, the Norwegian pines were used to build the masts of ships. So even the tallest Norwegian pine is seen to be but a wand, a stick, small stick, when compared to Satan's spear. So it is through these epic similes, that Milton is building Satan up as this huge, colossal figure, right, who is stalking hell now. So he walked to support uneasy steps over the burning marley, the clay soil, that is, not like those steps of heaven's azure, and the torrid clime smote him in sore besides, vaulted with fire. Nonetheless, he so endured till on the beach of that inflamed sea. And it's very interesting in the sense that, the sea that is being described very often in Milton, with this kind of a fire surrounding it, is a reference to the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea with its sulfurous coating and it's almost creating a haze of a fire, right, without any kind of life, is a sea that Milton is repeatedly alluding to, right? So uh, he says, sorry, afloat, and I'm sorry, on the influent sea he stood and called his legends angel forms, who lay entranced, thick as autumnal leaves. Enid, of course, in Enid, Virgil refers to the dead soldiers as, fallen leaves, autumnal leaves. So they're all fallen like autumnal leaves that straw the brooks in Vallombrosa, where the Etrurian shades high overarch embrower, or scattered sedge afloat. Now, Vallombrosa is a shady valley in the Apennines near Italy, and it was anciently known as Etruria. So, in this particular phase, uh, Milton is referring to the Italian classical Renaissance landscapes, as it were. Right. So, high overarched embrower or scattered sedge afloat, when with fierce winds Orion armed hath vexed the Red Sea coast, whose waves overthrew Busiris and his Memphian chivalry, while with perfidious hatred they pursued the sojourners of Goshen, who behaled from the safe shore their floating carcasses and broken chariot wheels, so thick bestrown, abject and lost lay these, covering the flood. Now, the reference to these, these angels prostrate on the sea, like autumnal leaves, is compared with what? This is another epic simile. It is compared with the Egyptians who had pursued the Israelites, the the sojourners of Goshen. The sojourners of Goshen would be the chosen people, right? Uh, the Israelites led by Moses. So Moses had led them across the Red Sea, and the Red Sea had parted for him. Remember that legend in Exodus. The Red Sea had parted, Moses had crossed over with the Israelites, and then when the Egyptians pursued them, the Red Sea came back and took them all in flood through Orion. Orion is the constellation of the of stormy seas, right? So Busiris and his Memphian. So let's just read that once again. You see how beautifully these lines go. When with fierce winds Orion armed hath vexed the Red Sea coast, whose waves overthrew Busiris and his Memphian chivalry. Busiris was the pharaoh, and his Memphian people, his Egyptian people. Memphis was at one point of time the capital of Greece, of Egypt. Chivalry, while with perfidious hatred they pursued the sojourners of Goshen. So they had pursued the Israelites to kill them, who beheld. The Israelites then saw from the safe shore their floating carcasses and broken chariot wheels. So thick bestrown, abject, and lost lay there, covering the flood, under amazement of their hideous change. So the bodies of these fallen angels are therefore compared with the bodies and carcasses of those Egyptian soldiers who were engulfed by the Red Sea while they were chasing the Israelites. You see how Milton is copiously drawing both from classical sources as well as from the Christian sources, the biblical sources, as well as alluding to contemporary figures like Galileo, in order to create this rich maze of allusions within the epic. He called out loud so that all the hollow deep of hell resounded. Prince, and this is the fourth great speech of Satan, Prince, potentates, warriors, flower of heaven, once yours, now lost, if such astonishment as this can seize eternal spirits, or have ye chosen this place after the toil of battle to repose your wearied virtue? Virtue in this case is strength. For the ease you find to slumber here, as in the vales of heaven, or is this, in this abject posture? Have ye sworn to adore the conqueror? So he says, are you sleeping? Are you resting? Are you adoring the conqueror? So this is the classic battle cry of the commander who is exhorting his soldiers, who now beholds cherub and seraph. So you had different kinds of angels. There were hierarchies of angels, of which the greatest angels were the cherubims and the seraphims. So the cherub and the seraph rolling in the flood with scattered arms and ensigns, till anon his swift pursuers from heaven gates discern the advantage, and descending tread us down, thus drooping, or with linked thunderbolts transfixed us to the bottom of this gulf. Awake, arise, or be forever fallen. See that magical voice of Satan, almost that inspirational voice of Satan is saying, if you do not rise now, God's army will once again come, and with thunder they will ultimately send us to the bottom of the sea forever. So they heard and were abashed. So they were abashed. They felt sort of lajja পেয়ে যাচ্ছে. And up they sprung upon the wing, as when men wont to watch on duty, sleeping found by whom they dread. So they are, as it were, found out that they were sleeping by their guards. Rouse and bestir themselves, they were awake, nor did they perceive the evil flight, a plight in which they were, or the fierce plains not feel. Yet to their general's voice they soon obeyed, innumerable. So they immediately followed Satan. So Satan seems to be this leader who can hold his pack. As when the potent rod of Amaron, sons of Egypt, evil day, waved around the coast, up called a pitchy cloud of locusts, warping on the eastern wind, that o'er the realm of impious Pharaoh run, like night, and darkled all the land of Nile. Now this is the reference once again to Exodus, where Moses had called down a plague of locusts on Egypt, so that the land was darkened. Similarly, all these angels, as it were, are like locusts who are swarming around the regions of hell, hovering on wing under the cope of hell, twixt upper, nether, and surrounding fires, till as a signal given, the uplifted spear of their great Sultan. Now, you see, very importantly, the Sultan was the kind of the title of the Ottoman emperor who was connotating despotism. So, Milton is suggesting obliquely that Satan is also a tyrant in his own way. He's a tyrant, a non-Christian tyrant, as it were. They course in even balance down the light on the firm brimstone, and fill all the plain, a multitude, which like the populous north poured never from her frozen loins to pass Rhine or Danube, when her barbarous sons came like a deluge on the south, and spread beneath Gibraltar to the Libyan sands. So it is as it were, it was assumed that the barbarians had come from Danube and Rhine, from the territory of the Danube and the Rhine, to conquer the rest of Europe. So the fallen angels are, as it were, compared to the barbarians. Forthwith from every squadron in each band, their heads and leaders thither were stood, their great commander, godlike shapes and forms, excelling human princely dignities, and powers that erst in heaven sat on thrones. So these were earlier gods, now they are fallen angels. Though of their names in heavenly records now be no memorial, blotted out and razed by their rebellion from the books of life. So these people are now proscribed from the Bible, from heaven, and they are their names are forever blotted out from heaven, and they will now have to be stay in hell. So got them new names, still wandering over, nor had they yet among the son of Eve got them new names. So they had not become gods for men also, right? So men would later on make them evil gods. So got them new names, still wandering over the earth, through God's high sufferance for the trial of man, by falsities and lies, the greatest part of mankind they corrupted, to forsake God their creator, and the invisible glory of heaven, of him that made them to transform off to the image of a brute, adorned with gay religions full of pomp and gold, and devils to adore for deities. And then were they known to men by various names and various idols through the heathen world. Say Muse, their names then known, who first to last roused from slumber on that fiery couch, as their great emperors call, as next in worth, him singly where he stood uh, on the bare strand. Now, here, of course, Milton is suggesting that once man had fallen, and the heathens had actually sort of emperors had been born. Especially, he's referring here to the pharaohs who and the Egyptians who were thought to be heathen and whose gods were, non-Christian gods, as it were. So he says that these angels once when man had fallen, these angels would be cast as heathen gods, impious gods, who would be famous, who would be fond of their jewelry and their pomp, rather than the what we can call the rather than Christ, who would be without any pomp at all, right? So they would then become, these fallen angels would then become the gods of these heathen people, the evil gods of these heathen people. So roaming to seek their prey on earth, dost fix their seats long after the next the seat of God, their altars by his altars, gods adored among the nations round, and durst abide Jehovah thundering out of Zion, throned between cherubim. He often placed within his sanctuary it itself their shrines, abominations, and with cursed things his holy rites and solemn feasts profaned, as with their darkness dost affront his life. So these gods would have their own, altars. They would have their own followers. They would be gods of evil, but still they would be worshipped by men, and their altars would be much beneath the altar of Jehovah. And then, of course, Milton will now proceed to give us a catalogue of who these angels were and who would be later on gods. But so far, what we have seen, because we'll stop here at this point of time, so far, what we have seen is, uh, Satan's stirring speeches, Satan's pride that he will not allow himself to serve in heaven. He would rather be fallen in hell and lead in hell. And he has exhorted he's suggested that, his mind, what though the field be lost, all is not lost, he says. And the great clarion call, it's better to rule in heaven, in hell, than be ruled in heaven, but serve in heaven. And his ultimate call to his mates to arise, awake, or be forever fallen. And now the angels are congregating, and Milton will now provide us with a catalogue, with a detail of the names of the angels and their evil qualities. But that we shall take up in our next class. We've just covered almost 375 lines. We're coming to the midpoint of the text of Book 1, as it were, and we shall take this up in our next class. So I'll stop here for the time being. I'll stop sharing for the time being, and we can take your questions after I finish, after I stop the recording.